Before I state this video, I just want to make a bit of a disclaimer, right? I'm not hating on Mayweather. I think he's an all-time great, and I actually made a video literally today saying that despite the fact that Crawford became a two-time undisputed champion, he doesn't have a resume that even compares to Mayweather's. So this is not me hating on Mayweather. This is just me stating pure facts, right? I just want to get that disclaimer out the way before anyone accuses me of being a hater or anything. But we need to be honest about it. Despite the fact that Mayweather is an all-time great, you can argue that the effect that he had on the sport was not positive. And the reason why I say that is because, let's be honest, during the Mayweather era, what became more important than to fighters in general was to be undefeated. Because Mayweather's whole stick, the whole reason why he sees himself as the best, wasn't just because he beat 24 world champions, but because he retired undefeated. And because of that, a lot of fighters were scared to take risks. Um, and that's one thing that I think to some extent hurt the sport, because a lot of fights that we wanted to see never got made because fighters were scared to risk their O, right? And for a long time, one of them fights was obviously Terence Crawford versus Errol Spence, right? But what's happened recently, I think the Mayweather effect has become less prevalent. Now, don't get it twisted. There's still fighters out there that do it. Like, you got the Tyson Furies of the world who doesn't want to take a risk and fight um, Usyk, because I think there's a chance that he knows that Usyk is a threat. So that's why he doesn't want that smoke with Usyk. And there's other fighters that do it still. Like, there are, let's just be real. Like, part of the reason why someone is a good boxing manager is that they manage their client, their boxers, to take as less risk as possible to make the most amount of money, and like to avoid certain fights that could spell disaster for their career, right? That's one of the reasons. Like, so usually from a boxing management point of view, doing a decision that makes you a good boxing manager could be completely the opposite of what us fans want to see, which is competitive fights, right? But lately, I think a trend has actually come where undefeated fighters are now fighting each other, and they're all doing unification bouts. And me personally, I could not be happy about this. I mean, recently we've had Ryan Garcia versus Javante Davis. We had Inui versus Fulton. We had Josh Taylor versus Teofimo Lopez. Now, they weren't undefeated, but it was still a huge risky fight. You had Lomachenko versus Haney, and literally last week we had Terence Crawford versus Spence. So I feel like the Mayweather era is kind of I'm not saying it's completely over. There's still fighters that are protecting their O. Don't get it twisted, but I think we've kind of come out of that era now, and it took like several, almost not. It almost took a decade since Mayweather retired for us to actually get out of this risk averse era where fighters were not taking risks because they were scared to lose their O. So the effect that Mayweather's had on the sport, like, don't get it twisted. I think it's great that he became his own boss and he was beholden to no one. But I think for the good of the sport, I think Mayweather may have to some extent destroyed the sport, because after he retired, fighters just were not taking any risks, and us fight fans were not getting the fights that we wanted because they were too scared to lose their O. But now that he's retired, I feel like fighters are seeing now that you need to take risks to be great, and taking a loss is not the end of the world. So yeah, I'm glad about this. I'm actually really happy about this, because us fight fans, we just want to see competitive fights. We don't really care who wins or loses. To some certain fans, they do care because obviously they've got their hopes and dreams on a fighter winning. But general fight fans like myself, I'm more of a fan of fights than I am of fighters. So I just want to see great fights. I don't really care like if a fighter loses. I'll watch them again if they're entertaining. But certain fans have got their whole identity locked in with a fighter. So if a fighter loses, it affects them mentally. I personally can't understand that. I just want to see good fights. That's all that matters to me. So tell me what you think below. Do you think what I'm saying is true, that fighters are taking more risks? And don't get it twisted, it still exists now. Like, for the longest time, Javante Davis will not fight Lomachenko. I think we know right the reason why for that, because at that time, Javante Davis's management just did not think he was ready for Lomachenko, and they protected his career and didn't give him the fight. Whether he wanted it himself or not, his management did not want that fight. And it still goes on now with Tyson Fury versus Usyk. But I think generally, fighters are taking more risks now, and they're not scared to lose their undefeated record. And me personally, I'm really happy about this because we're gonna see good fights now. And one of the reasons why I think this is happening is because of the UFC model. UFC generally, the fighters within their roster take massive risks. They're literally thrown to the wolves immediately. It's seen as the most elite fighting organization in the world. So if you could make it in the UFC and be a dominant fighter in the UFC, you're the real deal because you're going to be forced to fight the best fighters. You can't duck fighters like you can in boxing. And because of that product that they were actually making, and on top of that, when fighters take losses in the UFC, it's not seen as the end of the world. Like there's several top level fighters. Like for example, Charles Oliveira. Charles Oliveira's got 8 losses, but he's still seen as an elite fighter. So is Masvidal. So is Masvidal. So is several fighters. They're not completely undefeated. They still get losses, but they're still seen as great fighters. Um, but like with boxing because of the Mayweather era, they cared so much about protecting their own that they never took any risks. So I'm personally really happy that this era of I think is an era of weakness where like fighters are just too scared to take risks is coming to an end. I think whatever you think about Mayweather, he is one of the most divisive figures in boxing. Like his talent is undeniable, but I think the effect that he's had on the sport has to some extent damaged it. I mean, it has damaged it to some extent. A lot of fights that we've not seen because of what he did in terms of like creating this philosophy of protecting your own. I think it stifled the sport for a very long time, and I'm glad that we're getting out of it. But tell me what you think below. Is what you think I'm saying is true, or do you think we still have that? I think we still have it to some extent, but I think we're getting out of it a bit. I think fighters are taking more risks now, and I'm personally happy about that. But tell me what you think below, and like and subscribe to the channel. I've got a lot more content coming your way. Peace.